Okay, before we get started with today's episode, I just want to make a quick announcement. So I get emails all the time from Muslim sisters, from non-Muslim women, just asking me questions about Islam, telling me, struggles they have with the hijab or hesitations they have about converting to Islam, all kinds of different things. I get questions like these all the time. And I really appreciate and value these questions. I appreciate that sisters and even like non-Muslim women as well feel comfortable coming to me to ask them. But the thing is, I get so many, and some of them are so in depth that I'm not able to respond to all of them. So I actually set up a platform where you can schedule a 30-minute consultation session with me. Of course, I'm not a therapist and I'm not a scholar or anything. This shouldn't be taken as like expert advice, but this is just basically the same thing as if you were going to email me and I was going to get back to you. It would basically be the same thing, but instead of through email, we can talk on the phone. We can have we can have an extended amount of time, 30 minutes to actually see each other on a video call, be able to interact rather than just going back and forth on email. Also, with email, a lot of times I either don't get back or I don't get back on time because I just have so many other things to worry about. So this way I really have like a solid like block of time that I've just like made, like we've scheduled that time and we can just talk and go over whatever question you have. Again, I'm not an expert. I can't provide any kind of like definitive like you need to do this or whatever. But especially if you're a revert or if you're looking into Islam, I can almost guarantee that I've experienced whatever you're experiencing or at least something similar to it and can give you some advice based on what I've gone through. And it just seems like or a good amount of people are interested in hearing what I have to say or my opinions on things or my advice. So I wanted to open up this channel of communication to make it easier for women who are interested in Islam or Muslim women, my sisters, to be able to talk to me one on one. Obviously, this will only be available to women. It will not be available to men at all. But as I already kind of alluded to, you do not at all have to be Muslim in order to make a consultation session. So I'll have the information, the link to book a session with me. I'll have that in the description of this episode, inshallah. Asalaamu alaikum, and welcome back to Reborn Muslim, the podcast all about being a revert to Islam. I'm your host, Avalon, and today I want to talk about a topic that I think probably a lot of reverts are asked about because so many people are curious, both born Muslims and non-Muslims. I think people ask this question all the time. Why is it that people convert to Islam? Not even just in the capacity of like asking specific reverts, like what's your story? Like how did you end up converting? I think just in general, like there's this question of like what is this trend that we're seeing of people converting to Islam? Why is it happening? And yeah, just like wanting to know more about that. And I think that might be part of why people are so curious about, people like me and other reverts when they hear, oh, you converted to Islam, like you weren't a Muslim to start with, like let me know your story. Because so many people are curious about that story, even non-Muslims. You'd think it would just be Muslims themselves, but no, it's really like I feel like everybody's interested to know like how did that happen? Yeah, so I just feel like this is something I've been asked about before, and I've heard other people talking about and sort of speculating about and kind of making their own, kind of coming to their own conclusions. So I thought I would just put in my input on why so many people are converting to Islam, specifically at this point in time. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I hope everyone is having a great Ramadan so far. I can't believe already a third of Ramadan is gone. SubhanAllah. It does not feel like it. It doesn't feel like it at all. But I hope you all are having a productive and just a blessed Ramadan. And I hope you continue to have one. Inshallah. I hope we all do. I mean, okay. So with that all being said, let's get started. Let's talk about why so many people convert to Islam. So one thing I want to mention, of course, is that everybody's story is different. Every revert has a different reason for converting or has a different set of reasons. There's no like one huge sweeping reason that I can give that's like, this is why every revert converts, obviously. And I always try to say, I try to mention this kind of disclaimer on the podcast and with, the various platforms I make content on, because there's always somebody who comments, well, that's fine that you feel that way, but that's not how I feel. Like, that's not how it is for me. So I always just want to say, and I mean, like, honestly though, everybody has a different reason. I've met people who have like the craziest, most random story of how they converted. So everybody's very different. But that being said, there are some trends that I've noticed, and I think they're definitely like um, repeated answers that I'll hear when somebody is asked, "Why did you convert to Islam?" Especially as a revert myself, because so many of the Muslims I interact with are reverts. And inevitably that comes up. You know what I mean? At some point we have to talk about our stories. Like we have to hear like, wait, how did you convert? And we kind of get to talking about it. So I feel like there's been themes that I've been able to recognize through the years. So I feel like one thing that I've definitely noticed, again, the themes, of these like overarching themes of why people are converting. The one that I would say is perhaps even most prevalent, at least here in the US where I live, I feel like it's probably like the most common underlying reason as to why people convert is honestly like the state of society. I don't know how else to put it, like bluntly, just the way that society has, the level of depravity society has become or has gotten to, the things that have become normalized, the way we live nowadays. I feel like so many people are starting to take a step back and think like, this is not normal. There's so many different examples you can point to when you're thinking about like, how did society get to this point, or what is going wrong with society. I think one major thing that kind of like affects everything else and everything stems from it is the breaking apart of the family, the nuclear family, which I feel like so many people have talked about this. Um, and it's so true. It's like when you break apart the family, when you don't want to, when you normalize, for example, when you make it normal or even encouraged for women to raise kids on their own, because obviously like women end up in terrible situations that they could not have foreseen, and they're a single mom and they're doing their best, and like may Allah make it easier for them. Like that's not, I mean, nobody can, like, I don't know why people hate on single moms just like living their life like they're doing their best. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like, I feel like we can all like agree that in society nowadays, it's almost, I feel like men are almost seen as like additional things you can add on into your life as a woman or into the family even. Like they're not a requirement. Like you don't have to have a father in the family. You don't have to have a man in your life. And I mean, you don't have to have a man in your life at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to die if you don't have a husband. But I feel like there's been this, I don't know. I feel like nowadays it's just seen as like, oh yeah, get a husband or don't. It really doesn't matter. And just like wait as long as possible and just live your life and have fun before you get tied down to a man. And same thing with the family. It's just kind of seen as like, you can raise a kid on your own. You can, go to a donor and go that route and just like literally never have a man associated with the family. And it's like just you and your kid or you and your kids. So I've definitely seen this trend happening where, again, I feel like the value of men in the family and in relationships is being degraded. And I feel like men probably feel really disrespected by that, but also women feel the effects of it. Because if you think about it, like when you have a family, let's say it's like the husband and the wife and like, let's say 2 kids, when things are done the way that we traditionally do them in Islam, so the man is providing financially and the mom is raising the kids, it really just is a natural fit. It goes like it doesn't go against our nature. It goes with our nature. It's just a natural fit. And when you have women who are having to raise kids on their own and then also work full time on top of that, that's not a natural fit. You know what I mean? Any single mom I know, like it's life is harder for them and they don't want it to be that way. Like 99% of the single moms I've ever known, like don't want to be in the position they're in. That's just, the situation they ended up in. Um, and again, it's not like no hate to them. It's just like they ended up in that situation and it's hard. It's hard when you don't have two parents in the picture. And then on top of that, people nowadays, of course, they've like normalized this idea of like, well, you can have two parents, but of course they can be the same sex. And I'm not going to get too deep into this topic, but obviously in Islam, we do not allow that. That's not recognized as a marriage. Like we don't recognize a marriage between two people of the same sex. And we don't view that as a proper family either. Like we don't view that as what's best for the kids to have two moms or to have two dads. And so that's like one example, like the family being broken apart and being, like all of these things that were for so long, like considered very prominent values or very like how do I even say like basic things that like we all know it's best to have a mom and dad and then you have the kids. Like that's just how it is, right? Like that's just so normal and natural. And now everything is like pick and choose what you want. And even actually, even when it comes to kids, like when it is a couple, and let's even say it's a man and woman and they're married, the idea of having kids is not anymore seen as like, we should have kids at some point. I feel like nowadays it's just kind of seen as like, oh, I might have kids if I want to. But so many people nowadays are just opting to not have kids and to just have a dog instead, or to have a cat. And I don't know how to break this to you, but that's not the same thing as having kids. Okay. We've always had dogs in my family. I have a dog because I live with my non-Muslim family. It's not the same as having a kid. It is not the same as raising a human that will one day be an adult and contribute to society. It's just not the same. It's not fulfilling in the same way. And it's just kind of weird, this normalization of like, oh, well, I don't want to have kids. Again, it's like there's a family unit, and now every piece of it, if you think about it, is optional now. Instead of it all being, I don't want to say obligatory, but it was all just, the way it was before, even here in America, it was just, that was the norm. You're going to have the mom, you're going to have the kids, you're going to have the dad. Everyone's there together. Now it's like, and even like the concept of marriage too. Well, you can get married if you want, or you can just be in a, long-term, whatever, partnership, whatever they call it, where people like basically are married, but they don't even get married. You know what I mean? And even like just having a girlfriend, but having many kids with her, like, and having a life with her, but you don't want to get married. You know what I mean? So every aspect of it has become optional and has become degraded. I don't know how else to put it. It's like, yeah, again, if you want kids or you don't want kids, doesn't matter. If you want a husband, don't want a husband, doesn't matter. If you want to get married or you just want to keep dating for 15 years, that's fine. Whatever you want to do. And to some degree, I understand that people are like, well, whatever other people want to do, that's fine. But also when the family unit is pulled apart and when we don't have that structure in place in the home, that affects the rest of society. It really, really does. It has far-reaching impacts. And I've even read before that, like, oftentimes when huge, powerful empires fall, that is part of it. That is part of why they fall, is the families in some way being affected, like the concept of the family unit being affected. So it's not just a matter of like, well, whatever people want to do, that's fine. It affects society. And secondly, there's a reason behind it. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is that this isn't just like a random trend that like just came out of nowhere. Trends in society come from somewhere. Something encourages them. Some events will make them happen. And so when these things, so this is like the current trend now, of course, these things are, they've become more prevalent. And there's reasons behind that, I'm sure, more than probably any of us even know. But because these things have become so prevalent and they've kind of seeped their way into society, I think that so many people sometimes will actually play into it at first and believe it and just kind of go along with it and not question it, especially in contexts like university. I know that when I was in university, I was a very different person, and I was very, very tuned into that, culture, that like woke culture, whatever you want to call it, just like very liberal. But I think that once people, grow up a little bit, to be honest, like get a little bit older and have some time to reflect, and especially perhaps like get to the point where maybe they're thinking about marriage, or they're thinking about having kids, or they're at that age, or they're at least thinking about it, and they just have some more responsibilities to take care of. I feel like people have to stop and take a step back and think, what is going on nowadays? You know what I mean? Like, why are the things that have become normalized, why are these things normalized? Why are these things seen as acceptable? And really importantly, why are the things that are so demonized nowadays, why are they demonized? Why are they seen as so terrible? And why do we all just like kind of go along with it and think, well, I don't know, it's just like, that's what other people are saying, so I guess it is bad. I guess it is bad to get married. I guess it is bad to have kids. You know what I mean? Like, I guess I shouldn't ever get married, and I should just live alone forever. Like, I think a lot of people are taking a step back and thinking, why is this happening? And I think the logical next step is, for a lot of us, I think once we have that realization, it can kind of be earth shattering, especially if you're coming from that background, like I was saying with myself, of, in university, I was very tuned into all of this culture or all of this narrative, whatever you want to call it. And so it's very earth shattering to be able to reflect and realize, I don't really agree with these things. Actually, like, I don't agree with any of this. Like, this isn't This doesn't reflect who I am. This doesn't reflect nature even. Like this is going against nature. And I think a lot of times when people have this realization, even if they weren't as tuned in with it before, if you're surrounded by a narrative, it's going to get in your head. You know what I mean? Whether you like it or not, it's going to be at least normalized in your head. And so once people come to that realization that, you know what, this is not true. Like, what is wrong with people today? Like, something's going on and like, I don't want anything to do with it. I think the next step is to start asking yourself, well, what do I believe? And a lot of times we'll go back to religion when that happens. We'll go back to what are my, what does my faith tell me? Or do I have a faith? Or is the faith I have good enough? Like you start asking these kind of broader questions. Because the thing is, like, it takes critical thinking to get to that point in the first place, to get to the point where you're questioning your surroundings in the first place. Because a lot of people, to be honest, lack critical thinking nowadays. I don't know if this has always been an issue. I don't know what it is. It just seems like maybe this generation, it's especially prevalent. But a lot of people, they lack critical thinking. And I feel like even they lack common sense. And so the people who do actually have those critical thinking skills, who do have common sense and who are able to reflect on what's going on around them and decide for themselves whether they believe it or not, I think those people, again, go back to religion and start to ask these questions. And if you're looking at America, because I'm just using America as an example. So looking at America, obviously the like standard religion is Christianity. Like that's the religion of the nation. I'm using air quotes again. It's hard for me to do podcasts because every time I want to do air quotes, you can't see the air quotes. So I have to verbally say it. So I'm doing verbal air quotes. But it's not, I always say it's not really a Christian nation. Like, yes, it like in a literal sense it is, like it's technically a Christian nation. We say one nation under God and things like this. Like it is technically a Christian nation, but in terms of actions, it's not at all. And even that contributes, I think, to people pulling away from it and thinking, what religion do I actually believe in? Because they see the hypocrisy happening. But anyways, so obviously if you're from America, there's a good chance that you're Christian or your family's Christian. Even if they're not practicing at all, like so many families in America are this way where they're like literally are not practicing. They don't go to church like almost ever, maybe for Christmas and Easter. And like, that's literally it. So they don't really go to church. They don't really they don't really like, it doesn't affect their everyday life. They don't do anything different in their life versus a non-Christian's life. But they just come from a Christian family or a Christian background. And so if you were to ask them what their religion is, they'll say Christian, but they don't really practice it, right? So even if you're coming from a background like that, I think a lot of people, again, once they get to the state of questioning things, they go back to, okay, what does my religion tell me? And oftentimes people will kind of dive into the religion in a way that they never did I've noticed like in early adulthood when they're going through this transitionary phase of like, okay, I don't have to be the same as my parents anymore. I can just think for myself. And then they'll kind of go back to religion. They might go the opposite way, or a lot of times they might go, more like the more religious way rather than the more like, I just want to go out and have fun and do crazy stuff. And so they might start looking more into the religion and thinking, like I'm going to start going to church and this and that. And then they might start realizing, actually, this is not the good or the right fit for me. Or they might not even get to that point of like really going into it and starting to give Christianity a chance again. Because I know for me, once I had this sort of awakening or whatever it is, like even though it wasn't like one day it just struck me, I just feel like it was a gradual thing over time. But once I got to that place where, I was agnostic and sometimes even like identified as atheist for a few years. And then once I got to this place where I kind of realized, okay, something needs to change. Something's wrong with society. Something's wrong with everything nowadays. Like what am I doing? I didn't go back to Christianity, but I did like just kind of look into religion. Like I knew for a fact I was never going to go back to Christianity because for myself, it never made logical sense. It just never fit with logic. Like obviously 3 gods in one just didn't work for me. So I never went back to it at all. But I know people who did. They started like really giving it a try, like going back to church and everything. And I think part of the reason I never did that too was that I already gave it a try. Like I had been going to church every single Sunday my whole life until I was like 20 years old. I went on mission trip. I, like used to volunteer on Sundays, like with Sunday school with the kids. Like I would go to church. I would give it my try or give it my best effort or go to the, youth group, whatever. So I didn't feel the need to like go back and try to figure out if this is the right thing for me, because I already knew it wasn't. I already gave it a try, gave it all my effort, and I knew for sure this is just, it does not fit for me. It does not make sense to me, and I'm not going back to it. But like I said, I know a lot like people who have gone back and thought maybe it is Christianity. Maybe I just need to get more into my faith. And then even that proves to not help them. And so they kind of start thinking, maybe I shouldn't be Christian, even though my whole family's Christian and everyone I know is Christian and I live in a Christian country. That doesn't mean I have to be, that doesn't mean I have to be Christian. Like there's nothing that holds me to that. And especially as I kind of briefly touched on earlier, I think people who come from a Christian background specifically, again, using America as an example, I think they're able to see a lot of hypocrisy happening. For example, same-sex marriages happening in churches. I think that kind of makes people think like, well, that's clearly not okay in the Bible. Like that is not something that was considered acceptable. So why are we doing that? You know what I mean? Like, why are we allowing that? Or even I think sometimes people think about it and realize nothing really defines you as a Christian in this country. You can just live your life exactly the same as everyone else, do everything the same as everyone else, go out and party on Saturday night and get drunk and do all kinds of things that you shouldn't be, and then Sunday morning go to church and it's fine. And I think a lot of people are sick of that, and they're sick of the hypocrisy. And so ultimately, I think the next logical step from there is what other religions are out there. And it's, I think, an obvious choice to go to Islam, even though for so many people, they're like, am I really about to convert to Islam? Like of all the religions, like there's so many stereotypes against us. There's so much hesitation that you feel when you get to that point of like, I guess I'm actually going to convert. But really, it's the only one that makes sense. If you think about it, there's the three main Abrahamic faiths: Christianity, Islam, Judaism. So most likely you're coming from Christianity, or like very, very likely. So that's out of the picture. Judaism, you have to, it's an ethno religion. You have to be born into it. And yes, people convert to it, but it's a very long, drawn out process from what I've heard. And you're not really supposed to. Like I have a great aunt who is Jewish technically because she married a Jewish man. And I think like his family just kind of wanted her to be. So she like technically converted in so that she could be a part of the family. But I don't think they practice at all. Like from what I can tell, like they have like they don't really, like it doesn't really affect their life. You know what I mean? It's like a formality. So, and also, like I said, it's an ethnicity. It's not like other religions where it's just a group of thoughts and it's like something you can start implementing into your life. You can be born Jewish and be literally not practicing at all and like be an atheist, but you're still Jewish because it's your ethnicity. So I think a lot of people are like, well, that's not even an option for me. Like, why would I even consider that? And then there's Hinduism and Buddhism, which of course, like, I'm just listing the 5 main world religions. Hinduism is similar to Judaism. And also I think the idea of polytheism puts a lot of people off. And then Buddhism, I think that a lot of people are attracted to Buddhism. I was as well. Like I was definitely attracted to Buddhism when I was first like researching religion and everything, just because a lot of the teachings appealed to me and it felt so tranquil. It felt like, it just felt peaceful. But I think that once I really like dove more into it and learned the actual beliefs behind the religion, I started to realize like this like is not the right thing for me. And I think a lot of people go through the same kind of phase of like considering it, and then they look more into it and they're like, no, I don't think this is right for me. And so Islam is like the one that's left. You know what I mean? It's the final one standing. Like it makes logical sense. It's just pure monotheism. It's just one God and there's no other God but God. That's it. And it affirms all the things in Christianity. I'll speak from my own personal experience. It affirmed everything in Christianity that I did believe in. And it disproved everything in Christianity that I didn't believe in, like namely the theology of 3 gods in one, the Trinity, and Jesus dying on the cross to save our sins, or to cover our sins for us, so that we're guaranteed Jannah, or we're guaranteed heaven. It contradicts those things. It doesn't go along with those things, and it disproves them and speaks out against them. Even in the Quran, it says this is not true. But everything else in Christianity, that actually is true, it's affirming it. And even like the same prophets, all the same stories, like everything is there, but the bad parts are not there. Importantly, the bad parts are not there. in addition to that, Islam is the final Abrahamic faith. So it makes sense to go with the last one because that's the last version, right? And some people just don't see it as a legitimate part of the Abrahamic faiths, but that's, just like historically inaccurate. Like some people just kind of deny facts. So it is what it is. But it is the last of the Abrahamic faiths. So it makes sense logically to go with that one because it's like the most updated version, right? And like I said, it affirms everything from the Torah, from Judaism, from Christianity. It affirms all of that from the past, but without the parts that are inaccurate. And on top of all of that, it's the only one that's been preserved because especially with Christianity, the Bible has been changed so many times. Things have been added. So many things have been added. So many things have been taken away. It's been translated from language to language to language. It's like a game of telephone, to the point where now, 2,000 years later, who knows how close it is to the original. But I think we all have to admit, even Christians that I know will admit, yes, it is not the original anymore. And it's kind of like this weird nebulous thing of like nobody even questions where did the original come from, who wrote it, what language was it in, do I know somebody who speaks that language who can interpret it? Nobody seems to even question, at least for me growing up Christian, that was never something that I ever heard people talking about really at all. Whereas with the Quran, with Islam, the Quran was preserved in its exact state, in its exact words, in its exact language for 1400 years, and it hasn't changed. And by this point, millions of people have memorized it, like have the entire thing cover to cover memorized in their head throughout the years, So it just made sense. Like I feel like for so many people, it's just like the logical answer. Not to mention throughout the Quran, when you actually read it and you spend time reflecting on it, you realize that all of these issues that you're coming across in life and all of these things that made you embark on this journey in the first place and made you question all these, what's going on in society? Why are things like this? All these questions you had in the first place are answered through the Quran. And all the issues that the society that you're living in experiences and is, affecting your society, all of those issues are mentioned in the Quran in some way or another, and the answer is provided. Because we tend to think we're so advanced nowadays, and we tend to think that we're so unique, and everything is new. But that old phrase, like nothing is new under the sun. And I really do believe that because you read through these stories of the previous prophets, of the people that they were sent to, that God sent them to, and you're like, wow, that reminds me of nowadays. You know what I mean? Like that sounds like there's practical wisdom that I can take from this, even though it came down to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam so long ago, over 1,000 years ago, almost 1,500 years ago. There's still so much practical knowledge in it and wisdom that you can still apply to your life today. And I think that's something that happens with a lot of people who are considering Islam and just like looking into it. I think there's maybe one thing that set them off on the journey initially that, first of all, made them leave whatever they're doing before, whether it was Christianity or atheism or whatever. There's something that made them leave that. And there's also something that made them attracted to Islam, even if it was just one thing. Even if it was just that the Quran has been preserved, or if it was just the idea of hijab and modesty, whatever it might be, there might have been one thing that made them think, I just want to learn more about this, But I think what happens is when people start diving in and learning more and more and reading more and more and speaking to more Muslims and going to the masjid, they find so many other reasons that they want to become Muslim. You know what I mean? Like everything they hear just makes sense. Again, it just is like the answer to the issues we're facing. The issues of, again, normalizing things that shouldn't be normalized, normalizing basically like public nudity, normalizing, again, breaking apart families, like making it seem like families are optional and we shouldn't care to have a family. We shouldn't care to get married or have kids or anything. Breaking that down. And just in general, there's like the more you look in, the more practical advice there is from the Quran, and the more I think people are touched also by the way Muslims conduct themselves and the way they live their life. Because I know that's a major reason that people end up converting pretty much that's the reason that people find out about Islam. Obviously, it's not just through like the internet. The way they find out is through people they know. The reason they might convert might be, many different reasons. But that's at least like the initial introduction to the faith that people get is through Muslim friends or Muslim neighbors or Muslim boyfriend or girlfriend, astaghfirullah, like, it happens. But just like having Muslims in their life, that's usually how people at least are introduced. And I think that that kind of touches people too, especially once they're looking more into it and starting to evaluate, is this the right faith for me? When they see how Muslims live their life, I feel like it really does speak to them because it's so simple. It's like we're dedicated to our faith. We're very structured. We have our 5 prayers a day. We fast for a month every year. We're disciplined. But we also just like have this simple, like happy life, like not like our lives are perfect. Of course, our lives are just, we have issues just like everyone else. But it's like the issues don't come from the way we live our life necessarily if we're abiding by the faith. The issues are just, there's trials from Allah. Like everyone gets trials. But you know what I'm saying? I feel like so many people feel touched by the way Muslims live their life and they feel so intrigued, like, how do I live like that? So yeah, I feel like that's ultimately like how people end up converting. Just again, the more they look into it, the more Muslims they spend time around, the more they read of the Quran, the less hesitation they have left. So I feel like that's kind of my perspective on it, is that the way society is going, and I could get into so many other examples, honestly, of like things that are occurring nowadays that shouldn't be. But I'll leave that to you to think about. I'm sure you can think of many. So I think that really the core of it is like society is moving in a direction away from nature. That's like the best way I can think of describing it as. Society is moving away from nature. It's moving away from what's normal, what is inherent to our bodies, and what's inherent to our hearts and our minds. They're moving away from that and they're making things normal that shouldn't be and that go against our nature. And we're fighting our nature to what end? And I think that's what people are realizing. Like just a quick example, we've normalized friendships between women and men, but I hear people talking about it all the time. Listen, if you have a male friend, like if you're a woman and you have male friends, probably some of them like you, and even vice versa, So we all know that. We just know that inherently because we have these feelings, like this is the way we were made. There's no reason to fight your nature. I just feel like that's the example that always comes to mind to me. For me is like, why do you fight your nature? Why do you pretend that if you're like, you like women, why do you pretend that you can be best friends with a woman and everything's normal? And I think especially it's coming from women actually saying like, oh, of course I can be friends with men. Really? Because that hasn't worked out for me in the past. And I don't know anyone who it's worked out for, except for that they got married. So, you know what I'm saying? So I think people are just, again, I think society is moving in this way of like fighting nature and trying to just like grit their teeth and pretend like this is normal. No, this is normal. No, it's normal for, nobody to have a gender. Just more and more, we're normalizing these things and we're getting to a place where people are finally realizing, no, this isn't normal. This isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't how our bodies work. This isn't how it goes with nature. And technology has made so many things available for us that shouldn't actually have been available. Nobody questions if we should have done those things to start with. So anyways, I think that that's really at the core of why so many people convert, especially in a country like America, especially in an age like we're in right now. Like it makes sense why so many people are returning back to, classical traditional values through the religion of Islam. Okay, so those are my thoughts for this topic. That's what I wanted to talk about today. I hope this was interesting, or something that you could relate to. Or if you had this question and you've kind of wondered about it before, hopefully this gives you some insight from somebody who actually converted. Again, if you are interested in a consultation session with me, the link will be in the description of this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you again soon, inshallah. Asalaamu alaikum.